For the last 10 years, I've been working in the games industry and worked my way up to games art director. So I've hired teams of the top talent and also taught at university on games art subjects. Today, I'm going to be opening some works in progress from our users on Discord. In this video, we'll be covering loads of topics like high poly, retopology, unwrapping UVs, some little bits of simulation, and also some stylization guides. If you'd like your work to be featured for feedback in the future, make sure to click the Discord below and post in the works in progress forum. That's basically where I get everything from. So the first bit of feedback is for a progressor member, and this person's been working on a Count of Monte Cristo likeness sculpt. So it's always very, very difficult, but you're doing a super good job. And you know, when you're working on characters, you'll hit a lot of interaction with cloth and hard surface, and it can be a little bit confusing as where to introduce, for example, the hard surface elements. Are those in the Marvelous Designer? Do you do them later? And also, how do you tuck all of this in without simulating it perfectly in Marvelous Designer? So all those questions will be answered in a minute. So you've done a really good job with the base sculpt. So you should be proud of the kind of character structure that's here. I would have 1 or 2 points just to push it a little bit further to get some more emotion compared to the movie actor reference. And so basically the first one I saw was this character has a lot of frowning involved. And as a result, you can see there's lots of individual wrinkle marks. So I'm going to show you guys how you can easily do that inside of ZBrush. But it is something that I noticed was missing, especially in this area. You can see it's quite blank and there's not much going on. So usually what I do is I start with 2 individual lines with the dam standard. You'll find that a lot of the muscles and the directions are going towards this central point. I'm going to basically brush in that direction. You'll see how it forms out. So you'll see I'll do loads of little small brushes with the clay tubes, and the direction is going to be important because it's going to give you some accidental marks. You'll also have a lot of skin folding up here. So usually what I like to do is go sideways, building up. So just cross-hatching it like this. And then sometimes I like to go upwards just to support that central line. And then you can see it's creating more of a spherical and like organic shape to that. Incorporate that emotion. You know, the brows are going to start to move slightly across the eyes, squish everything into that central area, an indication of that brow shape starting to come off. And he was obviously looking like a little bit angry there. Go up a division layer and then just start to reinforce what you already put in, feathering in your details. Because obviously when you have a wrinkle, it's not going to be a perfect line. Then you get a really nice effect for a scrunching, frowning look. Another thing I noticed with this character was that the eyes were nice and round and open, where in comparison on the sculpt, they might be getting a little bit closed. And it's potentially because of the corners of the eyes, and the corners of the eyes are notoriously difficult and pesky because first of all, like, where do you position them? But I can show you in a minute. So I think the issue that's having here and why this eye is coming across a little bit like a clam shape, and it's really, really common in students' work when I see it. And it's because of the distance from the edge of the eyeball to the edge of the skin. And if you zoom out from what I've drawn, you'll see that's a really, really small distance, where on this sculpt it's quite elongated. So this one's quite an easy fix. It's not really present on this character yet, but I can insert what we have so far. So when these get a little bit too long, you get a clam effect. And especially when there's a smaller eyeball in there, it starts to look a bit strange. So there's a nice and simple tool that's going to rectify that. And that's basically the pinch brush. So you can mask the surrounding areas to protect it, but the pinch brush is going to act on the size of the brush. And then usually what I like to do is brush downwards in the direction. And you'll see that it's actually shortening the distance of those two while keeping the actual size of the eye. So in terms of this character, it's about just pinching these locations, and then these are going to come inwards. And then hopefully with those changes, it's going to affect it on this character. It's just going to open the eye upwards, almost like a bit of an illusion. So in terms of simulation and Marvelous Designer, obviously you've simulated the design of the pants, but the problem is you have nothing for it to rest on. So one option is you could actually import the physical material and the physical sculpt into Marvelous Design and then sort of like simulate it around that. But then you have to sort of like mess around with tucking all that cloth into the shoe, and then it can be slightly complicated. So there's a workflow that I prefer to do. Now, really the quickest way to do this is when you're simulating it. Obviously you want it really high, but it's not going to stay there. If this was for production, I would just press and hold W, and then that's going to add a pinpoint. And then with this pinpoint, you can just drag it up. And what I would do is make loads of pins around and guessing where the boot's going to be, and then just forget about everything that's below here. So the only thing we're really interested in is the upper half. So importing this into ZBrush, obviously it comes inside with triangles. Now we don't want that for sculpting software. There is a really good methodology to make this really clean into quadratic geometry, and I do have a video for that. So if you're interested in converting that in the process, I'll leave the link below. But for the time being, I'm just going to divide the triangles. That's totally possible. To give the example, you can see it's obviously got loads of artifacts on it. So if you're trying to tuck this into the shoe, quite simply just get the mask lasso, select the bottom section, invert it, and then you come to the move tools just to make it as small as possible. And then basically what you'll find is that'll be on the inside of the shoe, or you could make the decision to delete the topology entirely, and then we can start to sculpt on it afterwards. But at least we have all the top simulation, which is going to be useful, and it's going to look realistic with the boot. So that's the top bit is the only bit that we actually care about. But yeah, good job so far. I'm really looking forward to seeing you put the hair in there, whether it's kind of like sculpted or you'll be simulating it, or hair cards. I think that's where the big difference will come out. So next we have another progressor member, and I've been tracking this one quite well. You're making good progress with this character, and it's starting to really pick up the essence of the original concept. So that's definitely a good start. Now, you had a really good question about UVs, and in 6 years of teaching, I've never seen someone actually ask this question. So it's going to be interesting to delve into it. Maybe some people actually don't know how UVs and 3D basically interact in each other, and how that workflow is quite closed down sometimes. But before that, the first thing I noticed was with the face. And to me, they didn't look very similar. I looked into it slightly deeper, and I think it's mainly coming from the bottom jaw area. So obviously there's quite a loss of mass around this area, and I'll show you in ZBrush how you can build it up quite easily, because I can see what's going on here. It's most evident when you look from the side, and the effect that's getting given there. If you imagine older people that actually don't have teeth, or they take their dentures out, for example, they often get this shortening effect of their jaw and their mandible, and then it also collapses their mouth structure. So I think that's a little bit of what's going on here. So the way to basically rectify it is open up that space as if you were almost inserting some more teeth and some more length into the jaw and the top skull. And that's going to elongate the face and just fill it out a little bit more. And then what you'll find is you'll have some more puffiness in comparison to your concept. And especially on this one, what you've probably seen is the angle on the neck and how it transitions into the lower mandible is quite extreme. Like, this is quite sharp. So as character artists, there's a little trick that we do that just softens this area, but we still keep the definition of the mandible. So often a mistake I see students make is they obviously want the mandible to basically come out because it can be seen as attractive, but they sometimes take it a little bit too far underneath the skull, and that's not what's actually happening when we come into the sculpt. So I do it on this male character. So the mistake that's usually made, obviously if you want to accentuate this jaw, people get the damn standard and they follow it all the way down. It's even more hard if you're not working from a base mesh, and usually what's missing is this central section. So as soon as you start to cut in from a distance, it kind of has this unusual, unrealistic look. And I suspect that's what's happening with your character. Now, that in combination, we also have quite a lifted neck and a shortened mandible. So this is probably how it's looking currently. So basically, to rectify this, what I would do is get the move brush. You can do this quite haphazardly and just start to pull down the outer edge of the mandible. At the start, it will look slightly strange, but you're giving slightly more volume. Obviously, with a female, the shape's going to be different, so you have to track that. Now, with all and most characters, no matter how sort of like thin they are, there's going to be a buildup of throat tissue and skin, and you want to basically bridge this gap. But you'll see that I'm not bridging it to the higher parts of the mandible, because then we start to lose its structure. So you're basically getting the best of both worlds. You're getting the accentuated end of the jaw, and then you're also getting the side silhouette. Now, obviously that looks a bit strange, so you can just soften it all together. And then once you've put that bridge in, then we can start to shape this angle so it doesn't look so strange. So with this, you can get the move tool. So now we have access to that silhouette, and you're just going to make this curve over, change the shape of the jaw. So now with those basic structures, we've got something that's a bit more model-esque, or like mewing, kind of like pouting in that way. If you want to go realistic, we'd actually make this a lot larger, the angle won't be so extreme and acute here. Obviously it looks a bit strange on a default character with no other landmarks on it, and not too many males have this sort of like structure going on. So the other bit of feedback is for matching the concept as well as possible. So a useful technique is basically to etch out any areas. So for example, the skin that's showing here, and then this one's a very, very small triangle. I go over this in like different videos of drawing shapes on top of your character, and then that's really useful to compare it to your concepts. So if we redraw these shapes back on the concept, you'll see that this top section is a lot bigger, and then that's accentuating the accessory in the center. So while it looks like a small incremental change, it does actually have quite a big impact to the style and the look in the character, because the eye is getting drawn into this area, and we need this negative space surrounding the amulet for it to come out. So on the sculpt that you've done, that's missing. So I just put some expansion here and just add a little bit more space, and then that means the amulet's going to come out, which was what I'm assuming the concept artist wanted for this piece in terms of the shapes they were producing, and also maybe a reduction in the size of the lower cleavage, and potentially more accentuation on the breasts as well, because they're getting lost onto the torso. So those are the improvements that I would make for this sort of section here, just emulating the shapes that you see. Again, we've got another pendant shape here. So knowing concept artists and been making characters for games, this is definitely the stuff we basically focus on. And on that point, you might not have got to it just yet. I know this is a works in progress, so sometimes we haven't worked on areas, but I'd like to see some more anatomy. There's definitely some quick wins you can just by putting some more striations in here and accentuating some of the muscles. Because right now it's kept at its default base mesh version, and I think it's detracting from the overall visuals as it is right now. So on topology, this is an interesting consideration. So for the sculpt, obviously you've got some floating elements that are going to be on top of the accessory. Now that's basically how you should be sculpting it, because obviously you can select them independently. But when it comes to game meshes, you might want to take the decision to actually combine this all into one low poly. So that gives you a number of benefits. So you're making it very watertight. So the low poly is just going across the surface of the high polys, like this, for example. And let's say the red area that I'm highlighting in purple, that would be the lower surface of the sculpt. So this would sort of be like located on the bottom region. And then your floating elements, the bands, the high poly bands, these are just going to be floating on top of like that. And then the blue is going to be your low poly, and you can see how that's one continuous mesh. So there's loads of advantages to that. It removes any of the jagged silhouettes that you find when you do make low polys. So for example, if you've got things that are very heavily curved, especially for your wraps, then that's going to be a very good decision. And potentially when it comes to animation or shading or lighting within the engine, this can sometimes cause some problems. So we might have some shadow artifact because the geometry is so close to each other, and it's just like an extra hassle for the engine to work out, especially with your occlusion. The only real downside to connecting all this as one piece of low poly geometry is that you just have a little bit of extra work in trying to figure out the geometry. So you're still going to have to try and support the silhouette. So that involves getting the multi-cut and just cutting into the low poly and then inserting it. There's loads of videos that I've gone over on that, and there's also the 3 PDFs that I've made for you guys. So it's common problems when it comes to low poly and retopology, some hacks, tips and tricks. I think this one is involved in there somewhere. It's about 50 pages for all 3 of them. And then also common problems that you have with the retopology. So if you're having problems with retopology, chances are it's going to be in that common problems PDF. So if you want those, you can download those in the link below. Those have been really popular amongst the people that have downloaded it in tackling their retopology tasks. On the note of retopology, there's a slight disparity between the 2 resolutions. So this one I would consider way too high poly to be put into a games engine. Even for something like a cinematic, there's quite a lot of wastage, for example, on the downside of the arm. Potentially we would have this amount of geometry for in-game, more likely a hero character or a cinematic character, but definitely not a live action character that you would be using. Now with this area, in terms of the cloth, we've got a lot of curvature, and because it is cloth, if you imagine during the animation, this head will be rotating. So the animator is going to need lots and lots of vertices. So I really suggest getting 2 wins out of this. The first win is that the silhouette is going to be much nicer for the curvature of the cloth. And then also when it comes to the simulation, we're going to have slightly more options. So just increase the resolution of this area. It's going to like support you a lot, especially in areas of high deformation, and then also reduce the main polygon count of the character. And the same can be said for the breast area. So say for example, from the edges, you might see these spikes hang out, and with curved assets, so let's say that's a curved high poly, the last thing you want is really low poly geometry and these jagged areas basically like pointing out. So it's going to cause a couple of problems without getting too deep into it and carried away. You'll get some black artifacting when it comes to baking. So the more accurate a low poly is to a high poly, the fewer artifacts you're going to have. So that's always a nice feature. And then obviously we're not going to have these ugly silhouette corners. Okay, so another thing I found, because I want you to have the best quality out of this character basically, and it's on this concept. So the way I see this broke down, it is comprised of multiple units. And I believe you've taken the action of combining them all as one. So that's totally possible. I think for this one, what I would prefer to do is actually separate those as individual floating low poly geometries. And the reason for that is just this specific area, you've actually got some quite nice layerage. And even potentially you have the option to duplicate this because they look like the same sort of assets, this one and this one. So what you could do is create this as a floating piece of geometry and then start to reuse that in areas just to get some like higher fidelity. Also, if you imagine the trim of this, it looks like it's really fine thread. Now, if you wanted to achieve that level of detail and fine thread on your current one, you'd actually have to up the size of this entire UV. So if you imagine this, let's say we want double the resolution, you'd have to make this double the size and it would just completely dominate the entire UV area. So when you do split them up into smaller sections, like we have one section here, when it comes to the UV, we just have to increase the size of this tiny little island, and then we have access to put those like nice details and those nice threads in. So that's basically like a workflow optimization, because you do have a lot of details here. Now, on the bigger areas like this green area, while this is intricate, it doesn't actually require that much intricate detail. This is very basic, like sculpting lines, and that can be supported on something that's quite a small UV island. So what it could be is that your main area, highlighted in green here, would be this sort of size, and that's supporting all the sculpt that you've done in the ZBrush. And then your second version could even be like a comparable size off to the side, and then you're getting all the benefits of the detail there. So I hope that made sense. You can obviously post in the Discord and I'll help you out on how that works. So one more area I also saw, just because there's so much learning for you guys who are watching to obtain out of this. Obviously, when people are using their works in progress, it's great to see what's going on and take lessons from other people's works in progress. To me, what really popped out was the sizing of the UVs. So for example, this main structure is really large in comparison to the upper headpiece. And that might be a decision that you made, like we were talking about, where you just needed a little bit more resolution. And it's probably because there's like some more intricate details in here. But having looked at your sculpt and the concept, there are also a comparable amount of details up here. So ideally you want to have these a similar size. I think in 3D space, these are this size, but on the UV island, this is much bigger in comparison. So I would just like to see these laid out a little bit better, I believe. Now, another suggestion I'll make on UVs, this is going to be a very useful character. So you can see that there's a lot of curvature in this UV and on the 3D model. So that's a really awkward shape to work with. And as a result, it's taking up a lot of space. And it's going to be really hard to fit that in the UV. So with character artists, it's totally possible to actually flatten this entire structure. So say, for example, we've got a UV shoe shape like this. We can actually relax it in ways so it's just a little bit straighter. And what you'll find is it might fit a little bit better on our UV islands. So as the full workflow of character artists, we need to understand how we can fit these all on UV space while also trying to reduce the amount of deformation, because we'll definitely get some forms of deformation around this area from the bend, but it should be completely fine. That's not such an enhanced level of distortion, and we get a lot of benefits in being able to fit it on a UV. So you can see where you've done that already. You've basically straightened up these UV islands, and then as a result the UV is becoming more efficient, so better for the game, and also we're getting some more resolution out. So as to your question, you had a really good question, and that was basically when you start to edit a 3D model and you already have the unwrap. So say for example we've got our 3D here and we've got our UV here. So this is the 3D cylinder, and that unwraps like a nice flat surface, and the geometry basically looks like this. And at some point you might decide that you need some more geometry. You know, that's totally not uncommon, especially when you're practicing. Now in a perfect world, when we have done the unwraps, we would be able to make adjustments to this. For example, like bring out extrusions and then it will auto unwrap. But unfortunately that doesn't work. So as to your question, when can you actually edit the 3D and keep our UVs? It's primarily when you're inserting edge loops. So the geometry is somewhat changing, but the overall structure and the silhouettes aren't. So when you insert lines like this, it's going to insert it into the UV, but it's only upon actually adjusting the shape of this, or say for example like giving another extrusion, that we're going to start to get issues. What will happen on the UV is it will basically extrude that polygon in space and it won't unwrap it, and then you'll see that we'll have loads of artifacts when it comes towards the edges. So unfortunately, until we get some crazy new software that comes out or some like auto unwrap stuff, every time you make an edit to your 3D through the pipeline and through the workflow, you then need to go to your UVs and update it. And it usually involves a slight relax or a reformation. But really keep it up. I like when people undertake quite complex projects, especially when they're first starting out, because you're going to hit loads of issues. It's really demoralizing, but also at the same time, it's a really great opportunity to learn. So if you guys basically who are watching want to learn from this process yourself, definitely come in and start to follow a couple of these works in progress. I'm sure you're going to learn a lot and also avoid making those mistakes on your main characters as well. So we've got some more characters to go through. So next we have an exciting announcement. Someone who's finished a project, obviously in the works in progress. It's nice to get to the stage where you actually finish it and publish it. And this one's a very nice high quality character, and we've seen it all the way through. Loads of feedback, saying thank you for all the feedback along the way. So you're definitely welcome. But also remember, you're the one that's putting in the hours and hours that are required to make a character. So really something to be proud of and look back at the amount of work you put into your character. So this one's an interesting project to follow. There was loads of tips and advice and enhancements. I know we definitely did a members feedback session. We went quite in depth into your character here. So if you guys are interested in watching that, I'll add the link below, along with the ArtStation post for this character, which we're going to get into and showcase. So come onto ArtStation and give Layla a like and a follow, and obviously anyone else who's been covered in the works in progress. Now, as I showcase this on a feedback video, I'm going to give a little tiny bits of annoying feedback, especially because you've already polished up. Nothing too major, but it might be interesting for future projects and also anyone else who's watching. So first of all, it's an extremely high quality character. You've obviously put a lot of time into it, and it's come out really well. You know, there's a sense of physicality to it, and in terms of presentation, the way you've done it in the wireframes and the turnarounds, it's really high quality. So the only bits of feedback that I would give, and it's more of just to show people different styles of techniques, is to do with the tileability on the detail texture. So as it looks here, it looks really good, but I think there could be some improvements in just varying up the amount of tileability there, because only for the reason that when humans look at it, it's a bit jarring to the eyes, like a little bit confusing. So in Substance Painter, usually what I like to do, what I've done here is I've added a weave, just something that's tileable in the default Substance Painter tiler. Obviously I don't know what settings they use, it doesn't tile perfectly, but as character artists we would fix that. So ignore the tiling there. But obviously when you have such a large surface area that's resting, but it also has height and normal information, it can be quite jarring to look at. You know, this is quite a large PC monitor that I'm looking at on it now, and I'm almost, you know, falling out my chair looking at it. So if you want to break that up a little bit, but also keep the stylization you've got, because I understand it's like a very nice clean character. what I like to do is come into your mask. So potentially your mask has been applied to give you that height information, and then just add, right click and then add a fill. And then on top of that fill, I like to drag in something like a purlin noise generator. So the reason with the purlin noise is it's really nice and soft. It's not going to pop out when we layer it on top. So if I switch this layer to normal, you'll see what's happening underneath the hood. And obviously if we alt click here, we can see what's happening with the mask, and it's just blotching areas and reducing that height information, maybe reducing the normal map a little bit and blurring it nicely. So the settings that I like to usually go for is just change this from normal to subtract, and it's barely noticeable in the mask itself. But when it comes to the main area, obviously in the mask, we can change this value, see how much it's contributing. So if we put it to 100%, we can see the sort of direction that it's going. It's just reducing the height information area. So you can pick and choose where you want this. And then obviously with the generator, you can change the tiling depending on how big the character is. For this, we want it nice and broad so that from a distance, when the light goes across it, it's a little bit more interesting. But obviously with your character, it's going to be super subtle. You only just want a tiny bit of grayscale variance, and it's going to just negate these flat areas and have a bit more interest on the light. So I'll hide and show it before and after, so you can see just it allows the larger distant reads just to be a bit more bearable on flat surfaces basically. And also if you have underlying sculpt information that you've done, that's going to pop forth a little bit better, and it's all going to blur and blend really nicely. The only other sort of high level bit of feedback that I had, and honestly this is very high level. So with the topology you've done, I obviously like the topology. We worked on the striations around the torso, so you've got some nice deformation and animation while keeping those folds. Those look super clean, so those are really nice. On the cape itself, I would potentially decide to put more, especially for current and next gen, slightly more vertices on there, especially if you decide on simulating it. So the way you've laid it out, I'm assuming that you want to be simulating this, and that's for a couple of reasons. So first of all, I see that there's some texture on the cape itself. So when this is simulating, that texture line is going to maintain its visual because there's more geometry to basically work with. With the fewer geometry and the fewer polys during a simulation, those might stretch because obviously the vertices are going far away from each other. So that's something to bear in mind. Also, it's a very thin character, so once this starts to simulate, like we put it into game start and the simulation starts, this is going to wrap around quite a thin character, so there's going to be quite a tight bend, and potentially you don't have enough geometry here to support that. But then again, it depends how this basically starts to fall down. So just as a little addition, I would say put some more geometry in, and then we do some cleanup in terms of reducing the polys towards the top, because that's not going to move so much. But in terms of presentation, like in terms of what I've seen at multiple years at university and portfolios, this is in the top areas of how I would like something to be presented. So it's very easy to see. I can see the texture sets and what you understand in terms of textures, and also your try counts and things like that. Just looking at these UVs, maybe a bit of feedback. You've obviously tried to use the maximum amount of UV space by stretching out this head towards the corners. I wouldn't say that's super necessary. In fact, sometimes it's nicer just to leave these, because you're going to get such extreme levels of distortion, and we don't really need that much resolution towards the corners. And potentially something might happen in the future, whether it's design change or art feedback, where we might need that UV space. So say, for example, I don't know, like an earring or an extra tooth, or all these little things we need to have available just in case, some extra space. So try and, with the head, try and favor non-deformation and leave empty space. It's also great to see that you've actually got the character moving with the simulation, because that's the whole point of making such a cape. And potentially what you can see, if you're really finicky about it, this sometimes happens in different game scenarios and lighting situations, is it will get artifacts on and during the simulation. So I don't know if you can see it here, but as she turns around and the triangles start to fold, we start to get some artifacts that come in to get introduced. Very hard to see. I mean, you'd have to keep, I doubt it would be coming through on the stream, but if I play it here, if you look on the right side around this sort of area, this would be important for where you see it. the quads are obviously getting triangulated, and then those are causing shadows in themselves. So just like a teeny tiny little bit more resolution is going to get rid of all of that and make it look quite high quality. But yeah guys, how's coming in, liking that. Also looking to see how it progressed through the works in progress. Really good information here, and checking out the video as well. Before we get on to the next character, and while we're here, once you're on the Discords, you might as well come to the top and create a new post, a project. So no matter how big or how small, how good you are, if you've only just started out, it's really worth creating your character projects inside of a work in progress environment. So you can get loads of feedback from students and professionals. There's so many people on this Discord giving really valuable advice. And obviously you get a chance potentially to be featured on a video and get feedback from myself, which could be useful. The deadline for the next time I'll do this, so when I'll be looking at the works in progress, is November the 20th. So if you're thinking of a project or you've already got one, start to add it to it now. I'll be looking at them throughout the month, so don't expect that submitting really late is going to get you on the video. So just post as you are, but the last time I'll see them for the next video is the 20th of November. So the next bit of feedback is for Yaman, who's making this sorcerer character, starting to introduce really cool elements like animation and emissive. I can definitely give you some feedback for, and also testing out things like materials and cool attributes. So these are all really nice things that you can add to a character to basically like stand out when it comes to portfolio previewing. But Yaman's made loads of characters and is super active on the Discord. I'm always seeing him do really good works in progress feedback. And you had a very interesting scenario in terms of realism versus stylized, and we covered those topics again in the members feedback. So this is the concept, and this is the actual character. So the character as it stands, really good, but a problem I know you were having was that it was getting slightly divorced from the original concept of how it looks, and that happens all the time as an artist, and it's usually a fault of the software. So for example, Unreal Engine has more of an affinity for realism, and when you get into stylized, sometimes you need a technical artist or just need some more shader parameters to push it that bit further. Also, if you're used to making realistic textures, I know I certainly am, I'll always fall into the habit of putting fine details inside of ZBrush. I think that's what's happened a little bit here. So the bit of advice and feedback for this character is just to have fewer high frequency pores, and maybe detail the character from quite a distance. So for example, choosing to have maybe only a couple of pores, almost as many that you could count, and then from a distance in a stylized sense, it's going to give the effect, but not with all the high frequency and noise that you would expect out of realism. I also know we gave a bit of feedback in terms of reducing the grunge from the metals and just letting the metals rest. And I think you've done that very well. Obviously, it's never going to be super identical to the original concept, because concept artists are going to be taking a lot of liabilities in how they can portray the light and shadowing. So if you wanted this effect, you'd literally have to make a new shader material, which could be an interesting project in itself. And you'll also find it'll be very hard to match specific types of material. So obviously this is a crystal, and that you would have to emulate inside of Unreal Engine. So I'd be very surprised how accurate you could get to how it looks there, but it is totally possible. Maybe some interesting cube maps. You potentially use some hazing on the opacity or maybe the translucency. It's hard to tell, but maybe this could use a little tiny improvement just to get it a bit closer. I think one of the main points for this is when it comes to the high poly or the low poly, it's starting to lose its edges. Whereas on the concept, you saw that it was actually quite sharply cut, almost like it was a diamond. So if any way you can reintroduce that into your shader and your model system here, I think that would add a lot to it. I'd also be careful when you come to emissive. So obviously, like, this is a really cool effect. We can preview it on the Discord. And you've got that in combination with an animation and scrolling effects, and it's emitting light. The only thing I would be wary of is how much contribution this is giving to the rest of the character. So especially for our games engines, this will be a big consideration. How many shadows are we using and how many lights are we going to use? Because this is obviously very costly. So maybe just try and keep the emissive for presentation, or just refine it to this area and then have other point lights that fill in the rest of the character. Because chances are once the new lights come in, you probably won't be able to see this nice blue haze. So you might as well not have it because it's just going to be a little bit more expensive basically. One thing when I compare the 2D to the 3D is the pose and the expression. So obviously you've put it in a pose where it can be easily textured and sculpted and things like that. The only thing right now in terms of pushing it further is just to mix up this expression, because right now she's looking quite dead and robot-like, sort of staring into the distance. I'm assuming once there's just like a little bit of character put into there, maybe she's squinting or tilting her head, then this is going to unlock the soul of the character and the feel for the character. But right now she's obviously just in painted mode. So I'd really like to see a posed version of this. I know you're testing out some technicals here, but I'd love to see it just test out a pose, maybe move some eyebrows so you can get a feel for the character while testing the technicals and seeing if they work. But apart from this, both Layla and Yaman are really high quality characters. Both of you I'm definitely putting on my talent list for future projects. You're definitely on the list there because this is everything you'd want to see, everything an art director would want to see in terms of hitting high quality characters. Especially for the UVs here, they're very nicely packed and squared off. So for those that are watching, really try and square off and use the majority of your UV space. Game artists and games project leads are really going to like you for that. And my final sort of suggestions for you, Yaman, with your pose and also the testing, is to keep up the momentum. You seem to be producing quite a lot of characters, so the last thing you want to do is stop. You might be having a portfolio completely filled out if you keep that sort of up. So if you'd like to continue the feedback train, definitely come into Discord and check everyone who's made projects. Make some projects yourselves. You can also click one of these videos which goes over the last feedback. So loads of details like we've done here today. There might be some golden nuggets. And if you're interested in how to make hair for game characters, I've also got another video on that which delves in. Super easy process, much easier than you would initially think. So thanks for watching, guys. Submit by November 20, and I'll catch you on the next one.